it's like fireworks. Okay, but it gets very difficult to control the counterpoint. Welcome back to Composition and its Allies. My name is Barney. I'm a classical composer, and this is a channel for composers as well as performers interested in composition. In today's episode of The Hardest Part About Composing a Fugue, I want to share with you some of the major difficulties you're going to have when you're composing your fugue, as well as how to solve them. The first thing I want to bring your attention to, so at the end of the exposition, notice that we have no subject or response. Let's listen. Certainly we have imitations of the subject or response or the counter subject, so it's not like totally random, but there is no subject or response, and we have about maybe four or five measures of no subject or response. So how does Bach know how long this is supposed to be? This is one of the areas where it's just an unknown, and it's what makes fugue so difficult. Now, just looking at this, what I'm just going to assume is that he probably decided the ending or the next section, or he knows how long the first half has to be when all the entrances are there, and then this came later. Now let's talk about the micro transition. So in between the second and third voice, one of the areas that you're going to be uncertain about is once you finish the first and second entrance, is what next? In French, we call it la l'angoisse de la page blanche. It's you get this, it's kind of the shock of the empty space. You don't really know what to do next. So in this case, you're trying to get the entrances. So what I suggest is try to get the third and fourth entrance, okay, because that's more important than that micro transition. So you're going to get the first and second entrance, okay, and then you might dabble a little bit, and maybe you'll just naturally get to the third entrances, and then you can decide how much space you need to give in between for the micro transition. Now let's listen to another way that Bach solved this. Okay, so a very classic way to get in between the second and third voices and to bring us back to the tonic is to do a sequence. Sometimes if it's extended, we call it un divertissement. It just gives a little bit of break from what could become a monotony, predictability, but also it allows us to move back. Now, one of the things where you're going to have confusion here at first is how much time it needs to be. And this is why fugue is so expensive and is so difficult, because there's so much that you're not going to know. All right, so now I want to talk about the development of the fugue. You have kind of this stable section, right? The exposition where there's an urgency to bring in all the voices. And then you need to get into the development where you're going to be going through a lot of different keys. We'll see it starts in B flat major, which is the relative of G minor. The subject comes in the alto, and then it's followed by the response in the bass. Notice that the response has mutation. We have the leap of a third versus going up a second. Then we have the response immediately after in the soprano. And notice how there is no mutation. Another thing to notice is that we had subject, response, response. That's something that you're going to have to work out in the drafts. Then Bach gives some space, followed by the subject comes again, still in the relative, but this time in the bass. And he does stretto with the alto coming in with the response, no mutation. Then Bach gives some further space and we get to C minor. However, notice in the second iteration of subject and response that he's introduced a flat. Even though the subject, just in terms of the notes, is a copy and paste of before, he is already altering the pitches so that he can get to his destination. And of course, this space of about a measure and a half, how could he possibly have known how much space was needed? These are a lot of decisions that you're going to have to make when you're composing your fugue. Then he gets to C minor, the subject comes in the bass, and it's followed by the subject in the soprano, followed by the response in the alto. So all these things are to go hand in hand with your harmonic vision, but you may not know right away what needs to happen. So we have the theme, or the subject rather, in the soprano, and then he starts doing stretto, right? He brings it in the tenor, and then brings it in the bass. Notice as well that these entrances are a little bit modified. So the soprano, instead of ending a C La C, B flat A, B flat, he has the soprano jump up to the D. Notice for the bass that it does F sharp A D, so it's been modified. Then he brings a little bit of space, he brings the subject in the alto. And then the glorious thing that he does is he brings in the subject back in the tenor. This fugue started off with the tenor exposed, okay, and it had no accompaniment, no counter subject. And then the tenor comes back in its full glory. You need to know the ending of the fugue, because if you don't know the ending of the fugue, how are you going to plan everything else? You're not going to know how long the micro transitions need to be. You're not going to know how many sequences you need to be. You're not going to know how long the sequences are going to be. You're not going to even know what keys you need to go to unless you decide the ending. And most importantly, if you don't decide the ending or have an idea, it's going to be impossible to decide the correct proportions, and you're going to have to constantly go back and undo things you did before. Here is the ending. So the way I got this, okay, was I had to listen. One of the things of fugue is that we think it's something different from actual composition. This is not the case. It is still composition. So the same way you would write an ending for a piece, like what do I want the audience to hear? Like what's the last statement you're going to do with your fugue? Something I highly recommend is to also think about the harmony. Okay, because you're going to have the other voices. So in this case, it's for children's chorus. I was working at piano and I figured, what's the harmony that I'm hearing? Certainly, you will have counterpoint and stuff like that, but you need to kind of have an idea of what's actually going on. Here is where it gets critical. I think our assumption is, okay, what am I going to put on top of it? What I recommend is to get overlapping entrances, because when you're composing a fugue, the more information that you have horizontally, the more you can advance. If you're just stuck in one measure, it's kind of hard to get invested because you don't know if it's going to work in the measures afterwards. I got we saw the soprano 1 first, and then I figured out, okay, what am I hearing? Okay, I got the harmony, and then I heard the third soprano, which register the second to last entrance is going to be in and which voice. It doesn't have to be vocal, could be instrumental, but still the register is really important. Once you've had the second to last entrance, then obviously you want to try to get the third to last entrance. And then when you get the third to last entrance, then probably you want to get the fourth to last entrance. At some point, there'll be a breakdown, but this is just something to just get more material. So notice how I'm not filling in everything right away. I'm going backwards. I'm just like, okay, and again, just think melody, okay? The same way a normal piece, okay, what's the melody I'm hearing? Okay, the fugue is not something fundamentally different. In a way, I understand why people say that, because you do have to really think about the form. It's very different from a rhapsody, but nevertheless, it is still composition. So the impulses you would normally have anyway, okay, I want something exciting for the ending, or what's the last statement? It's still there. Oh, what's the melody? What is the audience actually listening to? In a fugue, though we say independence of parts, not every part is equal. Okay, the beauty of the fugue is some parts are equal at different moments in time. Everyone gets their kind of moment of glory. Everyone gets their kind of supporting role. But at any given moment, there's probably one voice that is kind of attracting the ear. So really listen for that. Another thing I forgot to mention is, instead of just thinking in these little bits and pieces, okay, you can think of what's the last entrance, right? Whatever your subject is, what is the last voice that's going to have it? The pedal is very, very satisfying to hear for the ending of a fugue. This, of course, comes from organ music, in which just holding one note is just really powerful and musically engaging. The pedal is also useful because it's going to simplify the texture, right? Because as we get to the end of the fugue, it's like fireworks. Okay, but it gets very difficult to control the counterpoint, and of course the danger is it gets too dense and you think, oh cool, I can handle this, and really it just doesn't sound good. So something that goes against that is actually to simplify the texture, and a pedal is really good for doing that. Now, one thing to just keep in mind is, instead of just having a stagnant pedal, like a whole note, now that can be awesome. Okay, you may want to do what I did here. You just notice how it's a pedal in the soprano too, but it's changing on different beats. This, of course, comes from fifth species counterpoint, which I think is one of the most important aspects of counterpoint. If you're going to go the counterpoint route full head, you've really got to think about fifth species, because in fifth species we are French say on est conseillé. Okay, we were kind of required to have different rhythms for each voice, and each consecutive measure also has to have different rhythm. But this has a direct application to fugue, where you keep us rhythmically engaged by, having each voice doing something at a different moment in time. If you're feeling inspired, I highly suggest that you get off YouTube and you start composing the ending of your fugue. Just get it done. Now, you got to get the exposition first, okay? Or at least most of the exposition, the first entrances, okay? If you don't feel quite ready to compose your own fugue, okay, and you want to do a targeted study, then check out the other series I have both on YouTube as well on YouTube Shorts, which is How the French Learn Fugue.